Misery, misery, misery. That's what you've chosen.
Don't you lecture me with your $30 haircut!
Hello there. I hope everyone is having a splendid day, and that you had a great Christmas and New Year's. I know I did. During that time, I reminisced often about my childhood, and a key figure that stood out to me during this time was Spider-Man. I loved Spider-Man growing up as a kid, and I'm sure many of you did too. I watched his cartoons, his movies, I played his games, I even read like 2 of his comic books. I also acquired some of his official movie merchandise as a kid, which, unfortunately, will not be used to explain my points during this video. I know this is upsetting news, but please try to understand how painful this must be for me to deprive my lovely audience of seeing such a wonderful display of movie discourse. I am truly sorry. Spider-Man was a very influential part of my life growing up, and still plays a key role in my life today. However, now, the reason for that is fairly different. I still love Spider-Man, but recently I've been exposed to some very interesting points about my former favorite movie, Spider-Man 2. And ever since then, I've been going down a very long spiral staircase of insanity. For the last couple of months, I've been analysing the Raimi trilogy and Spider-Man films as a whole. And that's what this video is about. Me going over Spider-Man 1, the first proper live-action film about the web-slinging goofball, and a very large percentage of people's favourite Spider-Man movie. Because of this, I would like to add that it brings me no joy when I say this movie doesn't hold up at all. I would even go as far as to say it's not very good. Throughout this video, I'll explain my reasoning for why I think that by going through the movie scene by scene, analysing everything that happens, and explaining why what is going on is a big pile of shit that harms both the writing and the narrative. So please, sit down, grab some orange-flavoured Tropicana and maybe your favourite variety of cheeseburger or pepperoni pizza, and let's whip-zip our way straight into this mess. So the movie begins with a nice little CGI opening of some webs against a dark background, with the names of the cast members appearing in the webs. It's accompanied by Danny Elfman's score playing in the background. Now, this is a good enough moment for me to mention that Danny's music in this movie is phenomenal. It hits all the right notes with me when trying to display the emotions and actions of the characters on the screen, and it just sounds fucking incredible. Good rat. Another thing to mention is the CGI, which unfortunately has not aged as well as the music. However, I won't be fussing over this, as the industry has come a long way since then, with this movie basically becoming a stepping stone for what we would get in the future. It was simply a product of its time and not really something to get upset by. After the CGI intro, we are met with the opening narration from the main character of the movie, Peter Parker, played by Tobey Maguire. It has always been a topic of debate among the Iron Boy Jr. community on which actor played the character the best. Many say Andrew Garfield had the best performance, some say it was Tom Holland and his boyish charm, while the rest prefer the OG. I don't personally have a favourite between these three, since none of them are Jake Johnson's Peter B. Parker, but I still think Tobey gave it his best shot, and he plays his role in this movie well. Everyone does, for the most part, with special praise going to J.K. Simmons for J. Jonah Jameson, and William Dafoe for playing my favourite villain of the trilogy, Norman Osborn. And the Green Goblin, sometimes at the same time. Now we are nearing my first problem that I had, but before I continue, I need to make it clear. I will be bringing up everything I have a problem with, or that I found to be a little strange. Some things you might not have a problem with personally, since not everything I am going to bring up overly affects the narrative in a way that the disappearing knife from the TLJ would. However, this does not mean that all of the issues I bring up will be like this. Despite what you may think, what would appear to be small, minor problems will soon establish themselves as major issues. Don't you worry about that. But with that disclaimer out of the way, let us begin with my first concern. The scene begins with Peter Parker narrating his story, and we are introduced to him by witnessing him running alongside the bus that was supposed to pick him up from school. Now, we never really get a clear indication for how long he has been running for in this scene, whether he just started running or he has been going at it for a good while now. MJ makes it seem like he has been running for a while, when she says, "Stop the bus, he's been chasing us since Woodhaven Boulevard," so I'm inclined to believe it's the latter. Now, I don't live in New York. I'm just a lonely little Kiwiman sitting here on my island, being confused for an Australian. So I wouldn't know how far this is, but I'm getting the impression it is a while. So now I have to ask my question. Why would MJ take so long to tell the bus driver to stop? Why not do it sooner? The scene's purpose is to establish that MJ is a kind and caring person, doing something to help someone else when no one else would. This is a good thing to do when establishing a potential love interest for the main character. Add her relationship with her abusive father and her very clear liking towards Peter, and you have a recipe for a good on-screen romance. But if MJ let Peter run for as long as the movie is suggesting he ran for, then why would she not have stopped the bus sooner if she is meant to be this good person? Now, it could be that she wanted to, but felt it would negatively affect her relationship with Flash Thompson, the bully of the movie and person we see sitting next to her on the bus. But since the movie never shows her having these sorts of issues with him, why would this be the case? Speaking of Flash, he is a rather stereotypical high school bully. There aren't any inconsistencies with his behavior, especially since he is shown to be the popular guy, at least with his friends. This is a staple in a lot of high school movies, such as 17 Again. It's also a thorough line throughout the adaptations of Spider-Man that tends to receive mixed responses, but it makes sense to do it here. He also doesn't seem like the kind of person who mistreats MJ in this movie, mainly because we hardly see them interacting, but there's no reason to assume MJ would need to protect her relationship with him before helping Peter, so it's a bit strange but not a massive issue. Speaking of things that are strange, why is the bus driver just sitting there smiling at Peter like an idiot? Isn't it his job to drive kids to school? I understand Peter might have been late, however in another scene it appears that the bus driver just straight up ignores him because he is Peter. Why is he being this much of a dick to Peter in general? Is it meant to be a practical joke? Is he messing with him? Whatever the case may be, the film doesn't address it, and again, it isn't really an issue, it's just something that bugged me and I felt I should mention it anyway. Now, I can hear the CinemaSins comparisons being typed out this second, but I just want to ask you to bear with me till the end. You are going to love it. Despite the nitpicks, this introduction does a good job of establishing all of our characters and showcasing their traits. Good job! Moving on to the next scene, the Midtown High seniors arrive at the Columbia University Science Department. Here we are introduced to the two Osborns. There's Harry, Peter's best and only friend, as well as Norman, Harry's father, the soon-to-be main antagonist of the film. And now we are on to my second issue. Still not an outright problem, just a wee little irk. Why is this the first time Peter is being introduced to Norman by Harry? We are supposed to believe Harry and Peter have been friends for ages, which is something that gets further developed in the later movies. Why is Peter only now meeting Norman? I understand Norman is a busy person, being the owner of Oscorp Industries and all, as well as being the head of the science department. But if you have enough time in your day to personally drive your son to a school field trip, then surely you would have enough time to meet Peter, one of the instances he would have hanged out at Harry's place. I am making a few assumptions here, like Peter visiting the Oscorp building, but since he delivers Norman's body to his home at the end of the movie, and he wouldn't have access to something like a phone book to find an address, one would have to come to the logical conclusion that Peter knows where they live. Possibly due to coming here beforehand, who knows. The other is assuming Norman could have enough time in his day to come back home early some nights, instead of staying at the lab like we see in the film. But I find this unlikely since he is seen several times in the film showing up to locations during the middle of the day. Harry even suspects him of showing up to the World Unity Festival. Again, this isn't really an issue, as I'm sure the relationship between Peter, Harry, and Norman could have been done in a similar way if Peter met Norman at an earlier opportunity. I am certain the introduction was done in this manner just to add some exposition for the audience. It's just a bit silly. Moving on to the inside of the university, we are introduced to the reason Peter gets his powers, the super spiders. And now here is where I find myself asking another series of questions in regards to these spiders. 1. Why exactly are these spiders being made in the first place? When I was watching the scene by myself, I could never really figure out what the reason for creating these spiders was, and just assumed it was because they wanted to, for the fuck of it. That was until I watched it again with my dear chum, Uverfall, who has the distinct pleasure of not losing his hearing due to loud sound abuse, so he was able to pick up a line where the lady says something involving enhancing humans using the spiders in future. But unfortunately, I have a problem with this. The line itself is very quietly delivered and very easy to miss, so I would have appreciated it if they made it a bit clearer, just for nerds like me who need everything explained to them. However, it just means that during the 5-year time period it took to do this, they have accidentally created a super soldier serum greater than that of Osborn Industries. Now, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. Human beings make important discoveries all the time. The discovery of penicillin, for example, was done on accident. But how exactly does redesigning spiders and enhancing them with the DNA of spiders that already exist translate to giving human beings, and possibly other creatures, spider powers when bitten? But whatever, comic book movie's got a comic book movie. I personally feel like this specific plot point was done better in the TASM films, where the reason the spiders were created was to try and use their healing abilities to cure Norman Osborn. But since Richard Parker used his DNA as the basis for the spiders, after he died, Oscorp couldn't continue the research on them without him, instead opting to use lizards with Kirk Connors. But instead of abandoning the spiders altogether, they used them to manufacture super cables with their webbing, which then allows Peter to become Spider-Man after being bitten. The scenario is nowhere near as contrived as what we get in this movie and makes sense in the universe, since we understand why Peter would be the only one affected by these spiders. Now, I would personally prefer it if we don't know where the spider came from, or what its intended purpose is, but since we do get an explanation, it just reaffirms my position of TASM doing it better. I mean, imagine if the spider that bit Peter in the Raimi movie went ahead and bit another person, and potentially a few more, giving them all spider powers. Wouldn't that be interesting? But anyways, moving on. 2. Next, I have an issue with how lax the tour guide is, where she finds out one of the spiders is missing. She does say, I guess the researchers are working on that one, but considering how important we know this work is and how expensive that one spider would most likely be, would you not want to at least make sure the researchers have the spider? I understand that she is currently touring a group of school kids, but she could have asked an assistant to check the researchers to inquire about the missing spider. Imagine if it had escaped and bit someone. You wouldn't be able to react to it in any way, would you, if it was venomous? These are an entirely new species of spiders created in a lab. There is no way you would have access to an anti-venom if these things were dangerous to be bitten by. Wouldn't that be frightening to whoever was bitten? But now this reminds me of something else I had not really thought of. How exactly does this super spider escape its box? It isn't like the scientists in this facility would be careless enough to accidentally leave one of the cages open, would they? I mean, the possibility is there, considering the competence level of many people in this movie, but I was at least hoping it would take more than 10 minutes for that to be the case. Oh well, at least it's staying consistent with the rest of the narrative at this point. 3. Moving on to point number 3. After Peter is bitten by a spider that resembles the other spiders in the lab he just saw, why would he not immediately go get that hand checked up on? He had just been made aware of a spider that is missing, so why not at least bring it up to the tour guide since he knows what it looks like and saw where it went? I know I just brought up how it would be impossible for the university to have an anti-venom on hand, but why would Peter still not at least try and ask about the bite to see if they could help him? Peter should be intelligent enough to understand the risk he is putting himself in by not getting his hand checked up on, especially considering his knowledge of spiders. What about afterwards when he starts developing symptoms? Symptoms, I hear some of you saying. What symptoms are you talking about? Well, voice in my head, I'm glad you asked. According to Healthline.com, Peter is suffering from many symptoms associated with spider bites, including, but not limited to, a red welt, swelling, skin damage, muscle pain or cramping, blister that is red or purple in color, sweating, difficulty breathing, headache, nausea and or vomiting, a fever, chills, and possible high blood pressure, but there's no real way to verify that one. He also does nothing to treat the wound we see developing on his hand. Peter knows a thing or two about spiders, and it wouldn't be a stretch to assume he knows a bit more about them considering how Peter is meant to resemble a stereotypical nerd in this movie. So him not knowing about the spider bite symptom is strange. I mean, if I accidentally cut my finger, I would at least run it under some water for a bit, possibly even apply a plaster or band-aid depending on how bad it got. Peter doesn't even put on an ice pack to try and reduce swelling on his hand. He just goes to have a little lie down instead, like, are you kidding me? This could potentially put your life in danger. You might go to sleep and never wake up again.
You good with that, Spider-Man?
The least you could have done was show this to your aunt and uncle, and ask them if they have some antibiotic ointment to help with the bite. Uncle Ben could even just have told you to wash your hand with some warm water and soap to prevent infection. You know, just something small to show me you people care about your well-being. Going back to the university scene, we found out that, apparently, the netweb spider, one of the 3 spiders used in this experiment, is capable of spinning webs whose strands have a tensile strength proportionately equal to the type of high-tension wire used in bridge building. This is the same webbing we see Green Goblin ripping through with ease at the end of the movie, but with webs that, potentially, are much stronger. Keep this in mind, I will come back to it. Moving on with the rest of the presentation from the tour guide, we come to the part of the tour where Mary Jane, who at this point will be referred to as MJ for simplicity's sake, notices that one of the 15 super spiders is missing. I have already mentioned my issues with the tour guide's lack of care, but I want to bring your attention to something else. How long would the spider have to be missing for it to not only climb up the side of the building where we see it, but also to build its web? This is also while not assuming it was just chilling on the web for a while after spinning the web, which it almost certainly would have been doing. According to papertrail.com, a website I use to help research spiders for this review, the average spider will take an hour to construct an elaborate web of silk thread known as orb webs, similar to what we see in the movie. The spider disappearing at this point means that no one in the research facility checked up on these extremely important creatures, while also accidentally letting one of them escape for potentially more than an hour. It seems to me that tabs would be kept on these spiders at all times, considering how important they are. So why did no one bother checking the cages to make sure all spiders were accounted for, especially before the tour started? This singular spider represents 5 years of painstaking research, and who knows how many dollars worth of funding needed to continue this research. Why exactly should I believe they wouldn't do an around-the-clock checkup? Just before someone says something like, but what about nighttime when everyone goes home? I would like to remind you that night shifts are a thing. Hell, my own mum works night shifts. Actually, now that I think about it, where is the spider located? The angle of this shot suggests that it is directly above them, possibly on the ceiling of the second floor, if not a bit lower. But in this shot, it is suspended much higher. So where exactly is it? I'm inclined to believe it is located on the ceiling of the second floor, because the first shot suggests it's pretty close to everyone else, and the editing of the second shot implies that it doesn't take long for it to descend to Peter. But this could just be due to the spider being genetically enhanced. So if it's the second location, it just means that the movie uses really dishonest editing to deceive you on the spider's location, just so we could get a few cool shots. Another thing I want to note about this missing spider is, spider webs are not particularly difficult to spot, especially considering how big this web is. I am willing to overlook this as an issue, especially if the spider's web is actually higher than I initially thought. It just means that if this is the case, the spider would have been gone for much longer than an hour, considering how much more space would need to be covered. According to this website, the fastest spider in the world can travel at a speed of 1 mile per hour on land, but while climbing, they will not reach the speed as there will be a lot of factors that will decrease their speed, such as gravity, friction, and the shape of the surface they are climbing. The speed is also bound to decrease the higher they climb. One of the world's fastest spiders, the giant house spider, aka that, has clock speeds of 0.53 meters per second or 1.2 miles per hour, and held the record for top spider speed in the Guinness Book of World Records until 1987, when it was replaced by this, although the later are not true spiders. So, some of you may be asking, why am I bringing up spider climbing and travel speeds? Well, that's because I do not feel the argument of genetic augmentation and enhancement can be used to explain that the spider that bit Peter is capable of climbing the walls much faster than the average. And that's because it does not fit any of the attributes of the spiders that were used during the genetic enhancement. I am fine with saying it still has a regular speed of an average spider, but will say that at most it is as fast as the fastest spider on the planet. It still means it would take a while to climb up this big ass building. Moving on to Peter getting bitten by the spider, we have to ask another question. Why did nobody see him react to the bite? You have to consider how convenient it is that no one saw Peter getting bit, despite the number of people around him. They would have at least seen him react to the bite by bending down, or am I supposed to believe no one asked him if he's okay? Alright then, I guess everyone in this world is just an asshole to Peter for really no particular reason. Maybe it's New Yorkers in general, man. I wouldn't know. It's not like there's going to be a movie made after this one where people just shit on Peter. That wouldn't happen. But anyways, let's move on. Oh come on, there was an instant mark in his hand after the bite. The spider is also extremely similar looking to the rest of him. How does he not say anything? As the movie progresses, we come to be introduced to the people working in Oscorp, such as Dr. Strom, the second lead scientist directly under Norman himself, the board of directors for Oscorp Industries, and General Slowkoom, a member of the United States military who is interested in having weapons be developed for him, as well as a serum intended for human performance enhancement, aka Goblin juice. I would just like to add it is remarkably convenient that not only has Peter been bitten by a genetically enhanced spider that just so happened to escape its confinement on the day of his school trip, and just so happened to bite him specifically, but at the same time this is happening, Oscorp is busy designing and testing a glider capable of nuking a bunker as well as a super soldier serum. My, what lovely little coincidences. After a demonstration on Oscorp's glider technology, Slowkoom says he is not interested and asks for a progress report on the aforementioned Goblin juice. In response to this, Dr. Strom mentions that the serum used on rodents showed a strength enhancement of 800%, but does not deign to mention how many trials they ran. Okay. When Strom is questioned on if there were any side effects during the testing, he mentions there indeed was one, to which Norman responds by saying that it was an aberration, meaning a departure from the normal, and that every test since then has been successful. Slowkoom proceeds to further question Dr. Strom, who says the rodent in question develops side effects such as violence, aggression, and insanity. How you determine a rodent going insane is beyond me. But perhaps the rodent started speaking and uttered out a phrase where it said The Last Jedi was a well-written movie. I'd believe he was insane too, and would take him out back to shoot him in the head. But back to the point. Norman tries to reason with Slowkoom, saying the entire staff, other than Dr. Strom, certifies the serum ready for human testing. Now I would like to bring up one itty little bitty squeety little question, okay? Why wouldn't the second head scientist mention how many trials they had with the rodents? Hell, why wouldn't Norman say anything about this if it was so important to him? He is actively trying to secure his deal with the military. I find it really strange to not bring up how many tests you have done. For instance, if 1,000 tests have been conducted, and one of the earliest tests was a failure, but every other test since then has been a success, why not bring that up? He also has the entire staff in support of his decision to move on to human testing. Surely one of them would have mentioned the amount of tests that were done on rodents. But whatever, this doesn't affect anything, especially since Slowkoom is very clearly not fond of Osborn. It's just silly. Speaking of Norman, why would he feel pressure to perform the test on himself that night if his entire staff, with the exception of Dr. Strom, feel that the formula is good to go? Was he lying? Was Strom lying for Norman's sake? But then why would he need to bring up the faulty trial? Now sure, Norman has been given a deadline of 2 weeks, but why would he need to conduct the test in secret? Surely he could have found himself a suitable test subject in less than 2 weeks while ignoring Strom's advice. Hell, he could have performed the test on himself the next day if he was really adamant on it. I mean, this isn't something small either. Ignoring all of these important facts is what leads Norman to becoming Smeagol. Goblin. The movie hinges on Norman fucking up his experiment and not safely conducting a test in a lab with his other scientists present. No Green Goblin, no conflict. No conflict, no movie. At least not what we got. But let us move on to the next scene, shall we? The next scene introduces us to Rosemary Harris as Aunt May and Cliff Robertson as Uncle Ben. Another two fantastic casting choices. These two are just great in this movie, with their actions and words holding a lot of the emotional weight for audiences, as I'm sure many of you would agree. But that's enough praise, let's shit on them too for a bit, why don't we? So Peter walks into his house and excuses himself to his room, saying he doesn't feel well. Sounds all good so far, right? Well, not quite. Why wouldn't Aunt May and Uncle Ben have noticed the massive mark on his hand? Like seriously, look at how big this fucker is when Peter lies down on the floor. How do you miss that? Maybe the reason Uncle Ben got let go was because his eyesight is non-existent at this point. They can also clearly tell something is wrong with him, physically, when he tells them not to worry about it. But if they notice the mark on his hand, they can figure out it would have something to do with how poorly he's feeling, and then potentially take him to the hospital. Considering how fond Peter is of his aunt and uncle, why would he say no? Especially if they explain their concerns to him. This is more likely to happen because Peter should be aware of at least some spider bite symptoms from a variety of spiders. He would be scared out of his mind. Why wouldn't he be yelling for help? And no, this isn't because he's just suffering from average spider bite symptoms. It is because he's suffering from average spider bite symptoms from a spider which was genetically redesigned in a lab. Why wouldn't he be worried about something like this? I understand Aunt May and Uncle Ben not knowing about what happened, but even seeing that bite and noticing how large it has gotten would worry most people, especially your parents and or guardians. We even see Aunt May is capable of noticing Peter's wounds later in the film, which she immediately reacts to by grabbing her first aid kit. I do not want anyone in the comments telling me she wouldn't do something about this. So now Peter goes to have his little lie down, and during his catnap he develops spider powers in his sleep. The DNA from the spider bite fuses with his own and remakes his entire genetic code. Until we get the one and only Spider-Man. Well, he used to be. At the same time this is happening, Norman Osborn conducts his experiments in secret at Oscorp Industries with the help of his ravishing lab assistant, Dr. Strom. And of course the experiment is a great success. And with this great success, we now have our two leads, the hero and the villain, the good and the bad. Peter wakes up the next morning feeling not quite himself. Apparently during his coma, his body underwent a 6-month transformation where he dreamt of nothing besides chicken and broccoli. After swapping out his old TV for a set of 4K monitors, Peter turns to look out his window and, oh no, Why does he have a direct viewpoint into MJ's room? Why does she have one into his? It is really creepy how both MJ and Peter are capable of staring into each other's room. No fucking wonder MJ doesn't talk to him for so long. Peter was probably creeping on her, thinking she never saw him. But oh well, I don't think it matters now since he is hot anyways. Moving on. We have Peter walking behind MJ to the bus stop, followed by some chasing shenanigans. Nothing to add, let's keep going. We have a scene where Norman is passed out on the floor after another banging night of hosting the loudest drum and bass party in New York, much to Harry's dismay and possible annoyance. He has also, shockingly, forgotten everything that happened to him the night before. Makes sense, several cups of jungle juice will do that to you, just ask me from last year's St. Patrick's party. While Harry helps his father off the ground, a lady from Oscorp comes to inform them that Dr. Strom has been killed, which rightfully shocks Norman. After all, they were lab partners. Add the glider and flight suit being stolen and you have one hell of a way to cope with a hangover. Alright, so Dr. Storm's body has been found in the laboratory and I find myself asking a few more questions. Would a facility such as this one possess security cameras? I mean, we don't actually see any. Okay, I would like to add a little side note here. During the recording and writing of the script, I did manage to find a camera, or rather SK Comics provided me a picture of the camera. That little gremlin has been hella helpful, and this will not be the last time he is mentioned. Thanks for the aid, my dude, I appreciate it. With that out of the way, back to the video. But that wouldn't mean they aren't there, would they? The earliest use of CCTV technology was recorded in 1942, so I don't want anyone telling me cameras wouldn't be common. Green Goblin, or Gobby as he will sometimes be referred to, could have scrapped the footage, however there is no scene in the movie to use to assume this would be the case. In fact, no one in the movie suggests that footage would have been checked, so maybe they just didn't have cameras, which is just really odd. Imagine having 0 ways of monitoring your highly advanced, expensive as fuck glider technology, along with your incredibly experimental Goblin serum. Imagine that the people who built the glider installed a tracking beacon that Norman just didn't know about. There's also the fact that Gobby would have his fingerprints all over the place during that experiment, from the table he was put onto to the little bottle he threw on the ground. Now, if anyone would like to tell me his fingerprints would be on those items already, considering he works there, I would like to bring up the fact that the only time we ever see someone, besides Norman, interacting with the vial of goblin juice, they are using gloves. So there is a precedent which has been set as to how these vials are handled. This could be an isolated incident, but I don't see why gloves and other safety equipment wouldn't be worn while conducting experiments in this lab. You wouldn't want to accidentally get some of this onto your skin or inhale it now, would you? Now, he could have scrapped everything, such as clearing the security cameras that just don't exist for some strange reason. Perhaps he was just ignorant and his calculations told him he would never be robbed, and tidying up the scene so as to avoid detection from police. But there's nothing to assume this was the case. If anything, it seems like he just killed Strom and immediately booked it for the glider, relying on the cops being as stupid as you would assume they are. But I am willing to give this movie some good faith and just accept he cleaned up the crime scene of any of his DNA that was left, while also keeping Strom's body there for some reason. Okay. I wonder if Oscorp has any security guards that work night shifts. I do want to go over one more detail, but I will save that for Gobby's first proper appearance. Progressing onwards to the high school scene. Now please strap in folks, cause we are about to enter the danger zone of this movie. The first scene that absolutely breaks the rest of the story, as well as severely harming the second film. I hope you guys are prepared for this wacky adventure. So the scene starts with Peter munching on some chips and MJ walks up towards him just to sit at a table located behind him. She moves past him but then slips on some orange juice, at least I assume it's orange juice. And in the scene straight out of Devil May Cry, Peter not only catches her, but also catches each individual item of food in the tray. Ain't it just lucky MJ didn't have any loose items of food like a salad flying out of her food bowl? Anyways, MJ thanks him, comments on his new 4K monitors, and leaves to eat lunch with her Chad 24-year-old boyfriend, while Peter goes back to silently munching chips. While eating his knickknacks, his hand sticks to something and... oh, forget this! He shoots a fucking web right there in front of everyone! How the fuck does nobody see Peter doing this shit? Any possible hope of having a secret identity is gone at this point. There's a person sitting right in front of Peter who would have easily been able to see him doing this shit. Then there are the people on the opposite table who could clearly see the web. Like, bruh, come on. He then pulls the tray his web is attached to and accidentally spills his beans on Flash's shirt. In an attempt to flee the scene, Peter gets up and walks for the exit. while still carrying the tray attached to his wrist via web. Okay, so I want to make something crystal clear here. MJ has a clear view of Peter as he pulls the lunch tray with a web attachment. This, along with the flip and fight with Flash, should be leaving zero doubt in her mind as to the identity of Spider-Man. Not to mention that days later, a surprisingly talented individual with spider powers appears in a wrestling match with someone famous enough to make it into the paper. But I will get into that a bit more a little later on. For now, let us continue with the retardation displayed on screen. Peter rushes to his locker, possibly to grab his bag so he can leave the school. I don't actually know why, but that isn't important. What is important is what happens when Flash throws his first punch. Okay, so according to the very first instance of Spider-Sense being used, it allows him to essentially view the world in slow motion in order to perceive the potential threats around him. This makes fighting him, supposedly, extremely difficult, since he will be aware of basically any threat thrown at him. We need to keep this in mind whenever he is attacked or caught off guard. We can also recognize the use of Spider-Sense thanks to the helpful little sound cue. So Flash throws first punch and Peter responds to this by dodging, ducking, dipping, diving, and dodging. Patches would be proud. After playing softcock for a while, he decides to go on the offense and unleashes his X-ray move he's been saving all match. Flash Thompson should be dead, and I'm going to explain to you why he should be dead in some lovely little detail. The force needed to send Flash flying is similar to what would happen if a person was hit by a truck or got into a car crash while not wearing a safety belt. According to an article written by scientificamerican.com, a study was done where the goal of the study was to examine how much energy is required to snap or crack a human bone. The bones in question were supplied from a deceased 52-year-old woman, which was subjugated to a 3-pronged stress test. The results from these tests showed that the bone snapped with varying amounts of energy depending on what angle it was done at. The amount of energy that was required varied from 375 joules of energy to 9,970 joules of energy. Now, to put this into perspective, 9,970 joules converted to pound force, or IBF, is only 22.3 pounds of force per square inch, which is not a lot if you think about it. Now, I would like to keep in mind that this test was done in a controlled environment and shouldn't be seen as a universal scale for breaking bones, only that it is interesting to have in mind. Another website by the name of science.ca brought up that on average a human can withstand 50 psi if the impact was sudden and up to 400 psi if the weight is gradually increased without injury. This means no noticeable damage such as bruising or markings, at least the way I understood it. Now, we will be more closely examining the use of sudden impact considering Flash was punched and not sat on. The figures listed above for PSI are interesting because it got me thinking, how much does an average expert level boxer or fighter punch with? The answer I came to is quite surprising, at least according to another website I used, which was WashingtonCityPaper.com. Now, I will be listing 3 different examples from this site, but I will only be using one example for my calculation. Example 1, in a study of 7 Olympic boxers in weight classes ranging from flyweight to super heavyweight, showed a range of 447 to 1066 pounds of peak punching force. Energy transferred from punch to target varied wildly depending on how heavy the boxer's hands and gloves were, how fast they punched, and how rigidly they held their wrists. The 3 flyweights, interestingly, delivered more oomph, or how hard something is to stop, than all but the 2 super heavyweights. Example 2. A study of 70 boxers found elite level fighters could punch with the average force of 776 pounds of square force. Another study of 23 boxers showed elite fighters were able to punch more than twice as hard as novices, the hardest hitter generating almost 1,300 pounds of force. Example 3. An off-cited 1985 study of Frank Bruno, who would go on to be the World Boxing Council heavyweight champ, showed he could punch with a force of 920 pounds in the lab. Researchers extrapolated that to a real-life blow of 1,420 pounds, it was enough to accelerate his opponent's head at a rate of 53 G, that is 53 times the force of gravity. Now that I've given you some examples, let's see what I can do with them. I will be using the upper limit of punching power provided in the first example to do this calculation, which is 1,666 pounds. If we were to convert these numbers into PSI using an average human fist, we can see that we would have a result of 164 PSI. These are still rookie numbers, which makes sense as I'm not very good at this, because according to kpcombat.ca, a trained striker can generate a PSI anywhere from 194 to 336 PSI. To put this into perspective, it only takes between 87 and 164 PSI to break a human jaw. These are numbers that can be attained by an average bloke, let alone a trained fighter. Now please think of this. How many people in pro boxing or any other fighting sport have you seen capable of punching someone so hard they flew 30 feet away from you? The only one I can think of was Bruce Lee demonstrating his 1-inch punch. However, even in this instance, he is demonstrating it on Joey Lewis, the, at the time, world heavyweight karate champion, meaning he probably knows how to take a punch. The punch also puts him on his ass more than anything, not outright sending him into the next bloody dimension. This is something not even Arnie himself in his prime could have done. So I don't want some dipshit toy collector telling me this is possible. Flash is dead, and there's nothing you can say to change that fact. Cry harder. Now, in this fight, a few things would have happened to Flash. Due to the high speed impact of the punch, and the fact all of the energy was absorbed into his chest, he would definitely have broken his ribs. Once the ribs are broken enough, which they definitely would have been, the chest would start to lose its structure and it would start impacting his lungs. Now for something lovely. If he got punctured in the space between the lungs and the ribcage, his chest would still expand as per normal, but his lungs wouldn't go with it. This is called a pneumothorax, which is when you have air in the space between the lungs and the ribcage. This is bad because it could lead to his lungs collapsing. Then you have to consider all the damage to the rest of his internal organs. If you were to rupture them, you could get problems like stomach acid splashing around the rest of your body, or if the bowel got ruptured, then you would have waste products sloshing around the inside of the body, where they are not meant to be, and the outcome is much worse. All of this is assuming Peter doesn't just instantly kill him from the impact of the punch. Now, how does this affect the rest of the story? Well, for one, Peter would be charged with murder, meaning the rest of the movie just doesn't happen. Cheeky answer, I know, but whatever. Secondly, his identity is completely fucked. Every Tom, Dick, and Harry saw what he did to Flash. This type of punch has never been seen before, and to have it come so suddenly is ludicrous to think of. Wait, hold the phone. Harry was there with MJ. Oh Christ, now I get to add Harry to the dipshit list with MJ in this movie. But his worst moments actually come in the second movie, so I will leave him alone for now. Anyways, the moment Spider-Man shows his face, metaphorically speaking, a lot of people should have put 2 and 2 together. But what about Flash himself? Well, if he is dead or at the very least injured, which is very generous, it means he won't be there to pick up MJ when Peter and her are talking, and he does not get rejected by her at the farewell. This could be problematic because both times Peter is right there to basically pick up the pieces. I know Harry is technically the person who talks to MJ at the graduation, but if Flash wasn't there, then it seems more likely that Peter would have had the better chance to talk to her. If not there, then every other time he sees her before the graduation. The dude literally wakes up next to her every morning and they walk the same route to school. But this is also assuming she doesn't just outright resent him for putting her boyfriend in the hospital. However, considering her attraction towards bad boys and people in positions of power, perhaps she would find Peter putting Flash in the hospital to be hot. Whatever. These conversations could affect the entire outcome of the movie, because if MJ and Peter are together, then Harry doesn't go sulking to Norman at the end of the movie about Peter's attachment to MJ, unless he is just really petty. Norman also doesn't lose his shit at Harry for inviting MJ to the Thanksgiving dinner party, which doesn't really change anything, but it is still something to think about. Norman is an asshole to Harry in this movie, so perhaps he would find something else to bitch about instead before excusing himself to plan the murder of his favorite son. The relationship between Peter and MJ would also affect the relationship between MJ and Spider-Man, because if MJ is with Peter, she would have to take him up on the offer to go and eat that cheeseburger, which means she wouldn't have been attacked by the gang of would-be rapists. meaning we don't get the iconic upside down kiss scene, which not only affects this movie, but a very important part of the second. But I'll get to that later. Now, to address the potential defense of Peter wasn't using his full strength because he didn't want to kill Flash, how the fuck would you know? Peter Parker is now only starting to learn his powers, so there would be no reason to assume he's holding back in the fight. It isn't like Spider-Man wasn't literally born that morning. Wouldn't it be great if there was a Spider-Man origin story that didn't have the protagonist immediately test their powers by dunking on someone with their full might? There's no possible way that would ever happen, right? I would also like to make it clear that I understand comic book movies are meant to have goofy physics, because if they didn't, then 99% of the shit we see wouldn't work. It's why we call it comic booky science and hand wave away most of the more questionable aspects of how these things would function. But since these movies are still meant to be based in a reality where the normal people in the movies are reflective of real world people, it means that anything that affects them should naturally translate to how it would affect real people. We can excuse Iron Man not dying due to the sheer amount of G-force affecting his body in his movie because he is wearing a futuristic suit that can protect him from all sorts of damage. We can believe Captain America's shield is able to do the things it does because it's made from a fictional material not found in the real world. However, these sorts of hand waves cannot be given to the average Joe, because they have no in-world reason to be protected from these attacks. Flash is not some enhanced super soldier or a man in a suit of armor. He is just a, supposedly, 18-year-old high school student. So him taking this punch, and not only surviving, but taking literally no damage, is both an eyebrow raiser and also contradicts itself later in the movie. Why must I care if MJ is put into a dangerous situation and then just ignore it when it happens to Flash in a similar scenario? It's a comic book movie after all. People don't have to die from a 30-story fall onto concrete. Green Goblin survives his fall. Clearly gravity isn't fatal. Is that enough internal consistency for you guys, or do you want to keep making pointless nitpicks? Anyways, moving on. So after Peter kills Flash, he decides to flee the scene of the murder and runs out of the school into some nameless alleyway. It is here where he realizes that what has happened to him and decides to experiment with his powers by climbing up a wall, yelling while he does it. Is it just really convenient that none of the people walking past the alleyway notice Peter crawling up the side of a building, or hear him hollering and hooting his lungs out? It isn't like he went deep into the alleyway so as to avoid visual contact from people. He simply just makes a turn and starts climbing. The streets seem busy enough and there are plenty of people walking by. Surely someone saw him. I guess it must just be an extra ability he has for some fucking reason to vanish from the sight while making zero noise. So this is why I was told masturbating is bad for you. Jesus Christ. We have some more dicking around with superpowers as well as a possible legal issue, but once Peter figures out that rock and roll is the key to web swinging, he puts on his copy of the Doom Eternal OST, walks over to the ledge and fucking goes for it. While Peter's traversing the Great Gap of New York, street number 352, I'm left wondering to myself, do people in this universe just not know what way is up? Fucking hell, he is screaming his mind out. People would definitely be able to hear him since they apparently are just too blind to see him. This scene is asking me to drop my suspension of disbelief that there is just no one on the street who's casually looking up. What a fantastic movie. After experimenting with different genres of music, now that he is rightfully addicted to the Doom Eternal OST, he decides to return home, without his backpack and jacket. Oh well, hopefully it's just still there in his locker. And oh no, Uncle Ben started without him, but at least he was kind enough to leave him some food. So after some arbitrary amount of time has passed, Peter decides to take out the garbage, just as MJ is exiting the house. Lovely. They have a chat and Peter brings up how he's sorry about today, and MJ says that it really freaked her out. Well, I mean, it should have freaked you out. Peter was clearly not being a normal dude in this instance. Pete then asks if Flash is okay. Now, the correct answer to this question should be, no, he is in the hospital and is battling to breathe. Doctors don't know if they can save him. He might die. But instead she says, he is just happy he didn't get a black eye. Are you fucking kidding me? After that Doomfist level punch he received, he was only worried about a black eye? Oh, and speaking of the devil, he appears in this very scene. How the fuck are you not dead, Flash? Apparently Flash has a higher durability than Olivia Octavius from Into the Spider-Verse, who got knocked out after Gwen kicked her in the mouth and sent her flying, but a similar if not far more lethal attack from Peter in this movie doesn't even give him a black eye. He seems perfectly fine in this scene, not even complaining about a cough. Shit, now I'm wondering why he isn't the main character. Where is my live action Agent Venom? Give it to me. At least DC understood his value enough to invite Flash into the Evil Justice League or whatever the group is called. I don't care. Man, I just can't wait for someone to make a One Marvelous Scene video in response to this and completely misinterpret what I say. Sounds like it's going to be some major fun indeed. After Peter gets a jealousy boner seeing MJ drive away with Flash in his new car, he gets to work designing his new costume, which he will use to enter an amateur wrestling match. This is so he can win himself some money and buy a new car, which will be used to impress MJ. Seems foolproof really. He would be far stronger than whoever they put him up against, so he should win this easy peasy. What could go wrong? What follows is a montage of costume designing, which is just great to see. Good stuff. We then follow this up with Peter practicing his web shooting abilities in his room, for some reason. Why not go and practice on one of those roofs you were jumping to and from beforehand? It would mean 100% less broken shit in your room. Also, not to mention you don't run the risk of Aunt May, or worse, MJ, who is in the room just next to yours and has an open window view of what goes on in your room, seeing you do this shit. Speaking of Aunt May, why doesn't she see the webs? They are all over his room and she has a very clear line of sight into it. Maybe she does see it and doesn't want to ask questions. Uncle Ben even says later on he knows Peter has been doing some weird experiments in his room, so it's possible they know and just don't bother asking. Probably embarrassment or something, I don't know. Or maybe she has the same sort of eyesight as Knives from Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, where she clearly sees something but pretends she doesn't because the person at the door says so. Either way, not a major issue, just something fairly silly. Or is it? After Peter's so-so successful experiments, he decides he is ready for the real thing, and is on his way to go to the amateur wrestling gig. On his way out, he tells his aunt and uncle he's going to the library. This sparks a response from Uncle Ben, who says that he is going to take him instead of Peter having to go by himself. This is because he is worried about Peter and wants a chance to talk to him. What follows is easily the best part of this movie, as I'm sure many of you would agree to. The "with great power comes great responsibility" scene has been ingrained into pop culture at this point. You would struggle to find someone who doesn't know about this line. Hopefully. This scene, followed by his inevitable death in a few short minutes, hit a soft spot with me, even watching it now again with the purpose of tearing this movie a new arsehole. I still can't help but feel steamy-eyed. I'm a sucker for a good death scene. It gets me roughly 8 times out of 10. Anyways, continuing the path ahead. So after Uncle Ben drops Peter off at the library, Peter turns around and heads for the Thunderdome, where he signs up as a wrestler and attempts to last 3 minutes in the cage with his opponent, Bonesaw. We all know what happens, but if not, I will get to it eventually. For now, I want to discuss a thing I mentioned earlier on, but now in more detail. You know, 'cause I can. It is astounding how there are not more people who know about Peter's identity, especially the people running the event who would definitely ask for ID before allowing him to participate. Firstly, they would need his name and emergency contacts in case of, well, an emergency, but also his age to find out if he's legally allowed to enter the fight. Unless this is like one of those sketchy porn pages that ask if you are legal but then don't ask for any verification.
Right? And as we all know, there is no way to get past this.
According to ICSCFMMA.com, fighters must be a minimum of 18 years old. Fighters ages 10 to 17 are allowed to compete in junior MMA, where they are allowed semi-contact to the body and no contact to the head. All fighters are also required to show photo ID before being allowed to participate. Another website known as teamusa.org, a membership program for wrestling in the United States, says that athlete membership is for those who are at least 19 by the start of the membership season. While much broader and not entirely about wrestling, and an article on the sportsjournal.org does talk about age requirements in sports in general. And one paragraph speaks of how before the National Basketball Association collective bargaining agreement of 2005, the minimum drafting age for the NBA was 18 years old. The reason this is not as important is because it is a different sporting profession. However, if this was a rule for something like basketball, we can all agree it makes sense to be the same for those things that are more dangerous than wrestling. So I feel that between these three websites, we have come to some sort of an agreement that age is important in the sport, and that ID would be required, even if it was for an amateur fight. So I don't want anyone telling me they wouldn't do that. That is insane. Now, the reason I am bringing up why it is important for this event to check for ID is because this is the first time Spider-Man has become a public figure. The ring announcer, played by Bruce Campbell, even gives him his name. So when Spider-Man ends up being a superhero vigilante and his name appears in every newspaper in the city, do you not think someone at this joint would try to get rich or famous by reporting who Spider-Man is to said newspaper outlets? Hell, they could think he's a menace to society and report him to the police. Who we see trying to arrest Spidey in this movie. You pair this up with the fiasco at the school and Peter's secret identity is as stable as your dad after 4 pints. If anyone wants to tell me that this is fine because it happened in the comics, well then I have news for you, it's probably shit in the comics too. I wouldn't know because I didn't read more than 2 of them. So that is enough of the ID shenanigans, but what about the actual fight? Well, it has its own problems. The first one being Peter's good for squat spider senses. During the fight, Bonesaw manages to get the upper hand on Spider-Man by hitting him in the back of the head with a steel chair. Now I want to bring something up. In the school fight scene with Flash, we clearly see he is capable of detecting and reacting to danger due to him perceiving his environment in slow motion. He was even able to see a fly's individual wing flaps, so this is some pretty good slow-mo. Bonesaw could have also swung that chair at a slower speed than Flash throwing a quick jab. There really is no excuse for Peter not being aware of this attack. He honestly should have reacted to it similarly to ducking one of Flash's crosses. But whatever, it builds tension I guess. Speaking of Bonesaw and the chair, I am very confused as to how durable Peter is in this movie. He somehow tanks hits from Green Goblin and survives a grenade being thrown in his face, but a steel chair being swung by Randy Savage apparently puts him on his ass and knocks the wind out of him. If this is the case, I can see why Green Goblin would want to use his fists to knock out Spider-Man instead of using literally any other useful tool at his disposal, but I'll talk about that later. Moving on. As the fight progresses, Bonesaw is given a crowbar and is going in for the kill. Spidey reacts by kicking him repeatedly and eventually knocking him out. Firstly, I would like to address the crowbar. How the actual fuck is this legal? Where exactly did Peter sign saying that he was completely okay with being turned into a Spider-Man smoothie by this thing? Imagine if Peter didn't knock out Bonesaw. Would he have just started to go to town with him with that crowbar? Jesus Christ, on a scooter. That could kill someone. And since we are talking about it, how fucking durable is Bonesaw? The same logic with Flash could be used here, since Bonesaw was taking the full brunt of Peter's kicks to the chest and face. His jaw would be well and truly broken by this point. Imagine getting kicked by Spider-Man multiple times, 9 to be precise, with a final leg toss in the cage. And not just Spider-Man, but an untrained, fresh power-having Spider-Man. A Spider-Man that wouldn't really be trying to suppress his powers, especially since he goes against the wishes of Uncle Ben in these next few scenes. Much to his dismay. You know, using his powers irresponsibly and reaping the problems he sowed himself. Bonesaw should be spilling his lunch and leaking out all of his orifices. Fucking Batman and BVS had better chances going up against Superman without the kryptonite spear. This should look like a scene straight out of The Boys. These 2 scenes are going to be made to look even worse by the time I get to Green Goblin's fight. Trust me. So Peter wins the fight by knocking his opponent out cold. He achieves this by kicking him into a part of the metal cage they were locked into. After being declared the winner, he receives his astounding reward of $100. This annoys Peter, as the advert and the ring announcer both said that if he could last 3 minutes in the cage, he would win $3,000. But unfortunately, due to him knocking his opponent out in 2 minutes, it means he isn't going to receive his full reward. Bit stingy, but whatever. Peter then leaves only for the wrestling promoter to be held at gunpoint and robbed. Peter then lets the gunman escape as he runs past them, much to the dismay of the fight organizer who was just robbed. Yeah, serves you right, you stingy bastard. Peter then leaves the premises and goes to meet his uncle for the arranged pickup time. However, tragedy strikes and Ben has been shot, dying while Peter still holds his hand. This rightfully makes Peter really angry as he gets up off the floor and proceeds to hunt his uncle's killer. This chase scene has some wonky CGI, however I still think it's good for what it is. Peter starts developing a keener understanding of his powers, and there are some rather gripping moments of tension, such as him almost getting shot and hitting the underside of a bridge. After causing the suspect's car to crash, leading him into an empty building on the pier, we get some of Raimi's horror handiwork on display. Upon getting a closer look at the perp's face, Peter realizes he is the man that he let escape, thus making everything that preceded it his fault. The perp gets cocky at Peter's shock, points a gun in his face, and gets his hand crushed? Either way, he trips and falls and dies. Peter then escapes the police and goes to have a cry on a gargoyle before returning to Aunt May to inform her of what has happened. I have no real issue with the Uncle Ben scene, the chase and the confrontation, all good stuff for me, as I didn't notice any potential problems. Spider-Man would also be more than capable of avoiding the police, especially with how incompetent they are, so congrats movie, you did it good. So moving on to the first Green Goblin attack in this movie, we see General Slowkoom arriving at a Quest Aerospace testing ground and bunker, see how it says it right there? Where he will be witnessing the first test of their human exoskeleton. The test is then rudely interrupted when Gobby arrives on scene and nukes the exoskeleton with one of the glider's missiles. He then proceeds to do the same with the bunker, killing everyone inside. So I would like to address a few things in this scene. Why in the fresh hell would General Slowkoom prefer to go for an exoskeleton like this one over the glider? The thing looks like a metal Teletubby suit. I understand he never supported Osborn and his program, but the fact that his glider and armor are not only far more agile than the exoskeleton, but the rockets on the glider are also capable of absolutely destroying that exoskeleton, as well as the bunker Slowkoom is in. Imagine what this thing would do in armed combat. Good luck finding any resistance. If you really saw the glider and wasn't impressed by it, then what in the ginger minge eating fuck would he want to do with this thing? It's slow, graceless, and can't even tank a rocket. How is this thing supposed to be used in the military, if a fucking RPG can put it out of commission? Speaking of the military, Osborn faces literally zero repercussions from the United States government, despite committing an act of domestic terrorism and killing one of its high-ranking generals. Actually, scratch that, he kills 3 members of the military. I don't know their ranks, but I assume it wouldn't even matter. If a movie like 21 Bridges is anything to go by, then apparently entire cities will be closed off in order to find 2 cop killers. So I am struggling to believe the United States government would fail to act on this. That is absolutely absurd. But I guess the movie has to go be a movie. What am I supposed to expect? That the movie would just pause itself to comment on the lack of government input? This movie is already 2 hours long. This is just part of the process of filmmaking. You just gotta deal with it. Fucking simps. Moving on to the graduation scene, we see Peter winning the science award and being embraced by his aunt. He then hears from Harry that his father got them an apartment in New York for them to use in the fall. So you have only met Peter once beforehand, but that one meeting and whatever stories told by Harry was enough to convince you to allow them to be roommates? Okay then. It isn't like Harry flunked out of every private school you ever sent him to, making it really obvious that he might have other plans for the apartment besides whatever he told you they were going to do. But it appears Norman is an excellent judge of character, so no worries then. Makes those weekly inspections later on kinda sus though, not gonna lie. Do you trust your sons or not? I mean shit, you didn't even think Harry would graduate. But whatever, moving on. We then have Norman congratulating Peter as well as giving his condolences, following it up with some wise words of comfort and saying if he needs anything to just give him a call. While this is going on, Harry spots MJ breaking up with Flash and giving him his ring back. Is this an engagement ring? Is it a promise ring? We never really get told, but it is important, so whatever. The important part is Harry. Now I know Harry is the one who makes the moves on MJ, but the point I was trying to make earlier is that if Peter was more involved in MJ's life, due to Flash being put in the hospital for God knows how long trying to fix him up, then this scene would have a very different result. MJ would definitely be spending more time with Peter if we are to assume she doesn't just resent him for hurting Flash. I've already brought up the attempted rape scene and upside down kiss, but what about the first time Spider-Man saves her? If she is dating Peter in this scene, then she isn't with Harry and doesn't face this level of danger, meaning we don't get to see her rescue along with the tower scene. This stuff all adds up over the course of the movie and affects outcomes all over the place. But I'm certain someone is still going to call this a nitpick, so whatever, proceeding. Following the graduation, we have the scene of Peter crying in his room with Aunt May trying to comfort him. I think this is a very touching scene and is yet another reminder of how good this movie can be if it puts in the legwork. The only issue I have with the scene is I am set more of the movie couldn't be as good as this and the Uncle Ben scenes. Unfortunately, the writing in this movie tends to negatively affect basically all of the scenes besides these ones. It's a real shame, honestly. After Aunt Meg comforts Peter and reminds him that Uncle Ben knew he was destined for great things, Peter goes to get his Spider-Man suit design, with Ben's words playing in his head. This then leads to a montage of him saving citizens all throughout New York City, and people giving their reactions about him to the camera. This scene is pretty good too, if it didn't reinforce the notion that there are definitely people in New York who should know who Spider-Man is. In fact, considering the descriptions of most of these bags, I'm surprised that someone like MJ doesn't even figure this out. Another sighting, New York was baffled over web-slinger. Gunman found trapped in goo. Like, Jesus people, did you all drink the amnesia water from season 7 and 8 of Game of Thrones? Cause if not, then I am struggling to understand how no one has figured this out already. We then get introduced to J. Jonah Jameson, my pick for best character in the movie. This dude steals the show in every frame he is in and is brilliantly played by J.K. Simmons. I also have no problems with this scene either, it's just great, though I am a bit iffy on that Eddie reference, but oh well, it could just be a different Eddie. Moving on to MJ and Peter meeting outside the diner, where Peter finds out that MJ is currently working as a waitress, but she is embarrassed. This is some pretty good character work between the two, and I enjoy their chemistry. But how fucking big is New York? How unlikely is it that Peter just so happens to run into Mary Jane just as she finished her shift? Like, what? I don't really have a problem with coincidences if they can be explained, since coincidences happen all the time, both in movies and in real life, so I am willing to give this a pass. This movie just seems to have quite a few of them. So Peter makes his way back to his new apartment, where we see Norman chatting on a phone while performing his weekly inspection, and Harry struggling to read. Peter mentions being fired from his job working with Dr. Connors, another nod to another comic character, and one we would see later on in the following movies. It's a shame he didn't do much besides being a glorified cameo though. Anyways, I don't have any issues with the scene. In fact, I absolutely adore how happy Norman is when he finds out Peter needs a job, along with how impressed he is that Peter declines, preferring to make it on his own steam. This is also where Peter finds out he can apply for another job at the Daily Bugle, thanks to the newspaper which is right in front of him. Upon noticing this, Peter starts taking photographs of himself stopping crimes at Spider-Man, which he then uses to sell for money at the Daily Bugle. So he has an OnlyFans. Alright then. This is where I get into another set of issues. I know, crazy, right? Okay, so the placement of the camera is a bit of an off thing for me. In the crime we first see with the camera, it appears as if the camera was there for a good while beforehand. This then calls into question, how does Peter become informed of crime so quickly? In Spider-Man 3, it is because he is listening to a police radio station. But in this movie, as well as Spider-Man 2, no such thing exists, for some reason. If he does have access to a police radio station, then why wouldn't Harry hear it? It isn't like they would be very quiet, and there's nothing in this movie that establishes Peter having advanced hearing. So then, how does he do it? Well, it would mean he either hangs around a place that has a radio all the time, or he follows police cars. If the former is a thing, then it is extremely irresponsible since he has many other commitments, and isn't something he would be able to maintain for a long time. If it's the latter, then it does not explain how he's able to make it to a crime in question before the police arrive, and set up the camera in such a way that it has perfect angles of him all the time. He is also risking the lives of those being put in danger just so he can catch a cool shot. Oh wait, I know how he is doing this. The police, you see, are extremely incompetent in this universe. They are not supposed to be able to stop crimes. They aren't even legally obligated to stop them. So, my bad. This movie is actually great. So Peter acquires his photos and has them eyed out by Jameson himself in the next scene. But, what the fuck are Peter's photos? The way these are framed makes it look like Peter is right next to Spider-Man when these shots were taken. Jameson should be questioning the absolute fuck out of Peter as to how he acquired such good shots in such odd locations. One of the shots is of him mid-air. How is Peter so close to him in that shot? Unless Jameson is an idiot, which you really shouldn't be trying to use as a defense, then he should definitely know something is up with Peter's shots. If he does know and is simply not saying anything about them, then the film does a horrible job at portraying that. It just portrays him as a greedy newspaper tycoon, basically squeezing Peter out for all he is worth. Also, since I'm on the topic of greed, why would Peter only settle for working here? Surely there would be other newspapers in the city who would be willing to pay him much more. Could it be because the Bugle is the most popular? I don't know, and it never gets explained. So we are left with the only option of just going along with the ride, really. And the more I think about it, the more the term theme park ride seems to be relevant when discussing this movie, since it moves by so fast and doesn't allow you time to actually digest what is happening in each scene. Praise Odin for the pause and rewind buttons. So after Peter secures the Fortnite Victory Royale at the Bugle, we flash forward to Norman and the rest of the board of directors at Oscorp Industries Tower. Here Norman gives them a heaping dish of good news, only for them to take it and spit in his face by firing him in thanks. Well, when I say fire, I mean ask for his resignation, but you get what I mean. Anyways, the scene is used to set up Norman introducing the board to the glory of Halloween later in the movie and gives us, the audience, understandable motivation for doing so. Now, I'm not saying I agree, mind you, I'm saying I know why he does it. But there's just one thing I want to mention about this scene. Okay, so I find it strange that the board of directors would kick Norman out without first inquiring about the recovery or whereabouts of the glider he was working on with Dr. Strom. It is still a very important piece of Oscorp technology. They would still definitely want to secure it, and since Norman was the head of the operation, it would seem like a no-brainer to question him about it. They could have done so beforehand in the meeting, but since we have nothing to confirm that this did happen in the movie, it can't really be said for certain. It's also relatively strange that a police investigation wouldn't be made after the robbery at Oscorp. This is very expensive, highly sensitive equipment. Even if Norman stops the investigation, what is to stop the board for calling one for themselves? Hell, they could even hire a private security company to do the job themselves, instead of relying on the police. Now, these 2 points are not necessarily a problem, as it affects mainly nothing in the movie, at most adding a scene or two if need be. It's just something I would appreciate the movie addressing. Continuing on to the festival scene, we start off with Peter taking pictures of his environment. Makes sense, he is a photographer. He then spies a newspaper implying Spider-Man isn't the most liked person in New York, which triggers Peter's big sad to return. To take his mind off of being a vigilante, he moves closer to the building with the statues from Batman and Robin, just a bit smaller. While here, he decides to take a picture of the influential and the wealthy, and just so happens to spy Harry and MJ on the same balcony. Is it convenient that Peter saw Harry and MJ on the balcony? Sure, but he had a camera and was taking pictures of the surroundings, so not really a problem. Now, what about Harry seeing Peter? Oh, not so much of a pass on that one, but a pass nonetheless, since it doesn't really do anything. Just another addition to the fine collection of convenience in this movie. Harry then feels guilty for dating MJ and decides to go inside because he forgot his drink. On his way inside, he comes across Charles Xavier and asks if he has seen his father, to which he says he might not be coming. And right on cue to being summoned, we have the Green Goblin arriving on the stolen glider. But not before we hear Peter's spider sense going off and using the same audio cue from earlier. Now, I have already mentioned Peter's unique ability to have inconsistent spider sense, but how is Gobby posing a threat to him at this point? He is very far away and is not attacking Peter directly in this scene. At least not yet. I am almost certain this is just one of those things done for the sake of a cool shot, rather than it being internally consistent. However, considering this is now a canon instance of spider sense being used in these movies, it calls into question every other instance of Peter not detecting danger from further away later on in the movie, but also later on in the other 2 movies. Speaking of the Green Goblin, it is remarkably strange no one is able to see him flying around the place or even hear him before this instance. The glider makes a lot of noise and has a trail of smoke wherever he goes. After the initial Goblin sighting from the public in this scene, every other time he flies around should be a red flag for the city's denizens. Police should be everywhere in this movie following Gobby. Or would they? At least the police being imbeciles is consistent throughout these movies, so maybe I should start giving it a pass.
Yeah. Like that's ever gonna happen.
I will say that, unlike another villain in this series, it would be easier for Norman to disappear from sight as the glider is much faster than police cars and is mobile in the air. Not to mention that nobody knows who the man under the mask is, so if he can hide his glider and armor before anyone notices where he has gone, it shouldn't be a problem after that. Also, if Peter's spider sense are kicking up now, and he has confirmed that it is referring to the man on the glider, why wouldn't he be suiting up just in case it is a problem? Him waiting this long to see what happens cost the lives of several people and almost kills MJ and Harry. I mean, he sees Goblin tossing 2 grenades before deciding to act. What, was the first one not enough for you? Did you need to make double sure that this entity your spider sense is warning you about is in fact dangerous? If you had simply gotten suited up beforehand in the several seconds it takes him to arrive, you could have avoided this, no? But the Spider-Man suit up scene does raise another question. Does Peter ever go back to pick up his clothes and shoes? Surely he would have to, but we never see him doing that, which isn't a problem in this movie, but is definitely something to think about. Well, actually, considering this is New York and there are plenty of homeless people around the place, wouldn't someone have picked up his clothes at some point? Whatever. So during all the chaos caused by this attack, we see MJ and Harry in trouble on the balcony as MJ is stuck on a piece of debris which is rapidly breaking apart. Ignoring my irritation of her not even attempting to get up and flee with Harry, we see that right next to her are the members of the board of Oscorp. Well, a good number of them, that is. And upon spotting them, Goblin tosses an incineration grenade, aka the spooky ball, turning all of them into Halloween decorations. What a useful gadget! It would be a shame if we never see a Goblin grenade of this caliber being used again in this movie, wouldn't it? Also, what exactly is the kill distance of this thing? In the scene where he throws it, it lands right in the middle of Harry, MJ, and the board of directors, yet only the board seems to have been affected. Also, isn't it rather convenient that such a large number of the board was located in this one singular spot, so that Goblin wouldn't have to waste time looking for them? Anyways, here's an unrelated picture of General Grievous.
Hello, my dear.
What the fuck is Goblin doing in this scene? Why are you antagonizing MJ? What purpose does this serve? Your son is also lying there on the ground unconscious and you want to waste your time giving MJ a little scare, you apricot? Just enough time for Spider-Man to swoop in and save the day, knocking Goblin off of his glider and sending him plummeting to the ground. Did you know he would be fine falling from such a height? Because if you didn't, it seems like you kinda tried to murder him. I mean, you were worried MJ was going to die when she falls, which leads to you rescuing her, but you're just gonna let Goblin fall? If you were planning on killing him with that, then cool, I guess. I just never pictured you as the kind to do that, Spidey. I know he kicks him into a tent, but if you want me to believe he planned on doing that despite swinging in from around a corner and not knowing where Goblin was located until the last second, then you are out of your gourd. So after being knocked on his ass, Goblin's glider goes berserk and attacks an innocent balloon, which is on its way to crush a child who is standing behind a barricade put up by the police. I have a question for this woman right here. How fucking incompetent are you as a mother and a human being to just allow your son to stand there instead of grabbing him? Why is he even there in the first place, you fucking melon? Hell, just walk past the gap, pick him up and run. Why does everyone in the city only rely on Spider-Man to solve all of their problems? Holy fuck. Moving on to Goblin getting back up and the police attempting to arrest him. The fucking police in this movie, man. You are really just going to stand there, all 5 of you, and none of you are going to try and pull out your firearm to at least threaten him? I understand there's civilians behind him, so opening fire really isn't an option, unless you want to run the risk of injuring them. But don't just do nothing. Instead, you could have raised your firearms and kept your distance, telling him to raise his hands and get down on his knees. The scene could have had Goblin recognize the situation he is in, and instead of doing as the police tell them, walk up towards them, saying, "You want to shoot me, then do it. Just make sure you don't hurt them while you're at it, huh?" Instead, the scene had to be played for goofy laughs because of reasons, I guess. The scene could easily have been done in a more convincing manner, just have 3 of the cops attempt to arrest him, while the other 2 aim their guns at him. Goblin would then display his super strength and toss one of the cops into the 2 aiming their guns at him. Such a simple solution. By the time they try to attack him again, Spider-Man is already on scene. It takes this extremely goofy Power Rangers battle and makes it a little bit more believable. I also just want to address something. I know people are going to try to defend the campy retardation on display here by bringing up the fact that this movie is campy. I don't care. If people are going to try and defend this movie as one of, if not the best, written Spider-Man movie, then defending this shit by saying it's campy is not a smart idea. It shouldn't be that difficult to defend this movie if it's well written, instead of copping out and saying the camp saves it. Also, what does Code Green mean? We see an officer yelling it into his radio, yet we never see what happens as a response to it. Was he calling for backup? Was he trying to get the crowd of people dispersed by other police in the area? No clue. We just get 5 jackasses trying to be Randy Savage, I guess. I don't really have much to say on the interaction between Gobby and Spidey, besides wondering if the power dynamic between these two will stay consistent, or if Goblin really is just that much stronger than Spider-Man. Was Peter holding back? I have no idea who is actually stronger between these two, and the limit of their powers is never actually explained. So it's just whatever. They are both super strong, except when they are not, I guess. Deal with it, Shandy. Once Goblin gets back on his glider, he decides to chase Spider-Man while shooting him with the machine guns he has attached, as well as firing a rocket which just duds next to him. Did you accidentally pack a firecracker instead of your real missiles? I mean, we have seen how effective these rockets are and the damage they can do, and we get another demonstration of it later in the movie. So we carry on the fight to a giant balloon, and Peter hears MJ crying out for help, to which he responds by yelling out her name.
See that? He's pointing at me! No, it's me! Me! He knows my name.
MJ, how fucking dense are you? Spider-Man literally yells your name to you. How are you not immediately thinking, wait, how did he know who I am? If you want to make the argument she is about to die and isn't thinking properly, then sure. But what about afterwards, in her own time, far away from danger? Why not ask him when he drops you off on the building? This is just one more thing to add to the list of things that happen in this movie that should make you question who Spider-Man actually is. Let me just go over a quick list of the coincidences that happen in this movie that make MJ appear to be more of an idiot than initially thought. 1. MJ was present when Peter first started using his powers, witnessing him using the web, dodging all of Flash's attacks despite not having a record of doing so in the past, doing like 3 flips in the air after jumping from a stationary position, almost breaking Flash's hand from gripping it, and then punching Flash so hard he sends him flying several feet away from him. 2. The fact that Spider-Man yells out her fucking name, meaning he would at least know who she is on a personal level, narrowing down the list of people quite significantly. 3. He sounds the exact fucking same as Peter. 4. Peter was with her just before she was almost gang raped before Spider-Man showed up. 5. Apparently Peter and Spidey are on such good terms with each other that not only is he his unofficial photographer, but they also speak to each other multiple times, and the topic of discussion sometimes becomes about MJ, where Peter talks explicitly about how cool MJ is. Like, Jesus, and men get shit for not knowing how to take a hint. 6. Green Goblin yells out to Spider-Man, "Let die the woman you love," while holding her, the person he kidnapped, directly after attacking Aunt May. All people who have a very personal connection to Peter. 7. Peter, even at the end of this movie, tells her to her face that he can't be with her, and that he can't tell her why he can't be with her. 8. He kisses the exact fucking same as Spider-Man. All of these lovely little coincidences, and you couldn't put together the idea in your head that Peter is Spider-Man. To this movie's credit, it does set up that she knows by the end of the movie due to the aforementioned fact of him kissing the Sam. On the other hand, this gets changed in the second movie. Yet, even if this was the only Spider-Man movie made, it still doesn't change the fact you should have figured this out much sooner. Okay, so, continuing the fight, we see Spidey trying to jump to MJ, only to be caught by Goblin and dragged into a window. He then proceeds to shove his head into the already destroyed window and then punches him in the gut a few times before punching him off the glider. I wonder where all the power he displayed with his earlier kick went. Upon hitting the ground, Spidey turns his back to Gobby and almost catches a volley of bullets as payment until MJ warns him. Now, his Spidey senses could have warned him, but we already know it's inconsistent in this movie. So who knows what would have happened if MJ didn't warn him. Before Goblin can fire, Spidey shoots a web in his face, blinding him. What a handy idea. I wonder if he will ever do that again in this movie. Anyways, Spidey uses this distraction to rip out a part of the glider, which affects its ability to function properly. Goblin, who is now blind, deaf, and stupid, decides to retreat to fight another day. Spidey then acts quickly to save MJ as she falls to her death, carrying off into the sunset and placing her safely on top of a tower. This would be a really good time to ask, "Why do you know my name, MJ?" But whatever, this entire first fight scene is very silly in its delivery, and the power levels of Spider-Man and Goblin are all over the place. We have extremely incompetent police, a love interest that is nothing more than a ditzy redhead, damsel in distress, cheesy as fuck line delivery, and really retarded uses of abilities and gadgets. Great! Can't wait to see the rest of them. After that, we have a scene of Harry and Peter in their apartment, with Harry asking how MJ's doing. Sounds like even in her quiet time, she still doesn't question how Spider-Man knows her name, which is just grand. Besides that, I have nothing really much to say. It's a pretty inoffensive scene. I also have nothing to say over the Norman and Green Goblin scene, besides it just being great to watch. In fact, I have nothing to say until the Green Goblin attack on the Bugle, but thankfully it doesn't take long for that to happen anyways. So here we go. So now we get to one of my biggest pet peeves in this movie. The main villain is a ninja who has no real right to be one. I put this down to Raimi's experience as a horror movie director for why he would do this, but it makes zero sense in the universe for a few reasons. 1. Green Goblin is loud as fuck, and he has a trail of smoke following him wherever he goes, meaning that during the day he is almost impossible to miss. Note how I said almost. Most people with access to a phone would have called the cops, especially since he has made the front page of a newspaper. We see Betty on the phone immediately trying to call the cops, so I don't want to hear any of it. The guy is a domestic terrorist who bombed the World Unity Festival and killed 8 people, possibly more. I do not see any reason why people wouldn't immediately try to get him arrested. 2. It has already been established that Peter's spider sense can detect Green Goblin from miles away, even if he doesn't pose a direct threat to him. Why would it not be doing the same thing here? In fact, it should be doing more active things since Goblin poses more of a threat to him in this proximity. Peter's spider senses are so incredibly inconsistent in this movie for no real reason other than the desire for a cool shot. But remember guys, this is the best Spider-Man movie. So anyways, Goblin grabs a hold of Jameson and demands to know who's the photographer that takes the pictures of Spider-Man, and is met with brutal dishonesty from Jameson in return.
I don't know who he is. His stuff comes. You're lying! I swear.
Now, I really like this scene because it shows a bit of dimension to Jameson's character, proving he isn't just a greedy businessman, but also someone who cares about his employees. Goblin doesn't like that. Not one bit. So he gets ready to go for a swing, only to be stopped by Spider-Man appearing out of nowhere, just in the nick of time. He webs Jameson up and demands a private chat with his new pal. Goblin responds to this by using his sleep gas. And now we get to one of the worst parts of this movie, in my opinion, the sleep gas. This single-handedly breaks the rest of the fights in this movie. It is non-lethal, so apparently Peter's spider senses wouldn't detect it. Point 1 for Gobby. It is easily accessible to Gobby, all he has to do is aim his arm. Point 2. And finally, they activate instantly, and create results as soon as they are used. Anytime Goblin is in a fight with Spider-Man and is losing, he could have pulled this ability out for an instant KO. Hell, he could have started his fights with this thing a lot of the time if he wanted to, and either killed Spider-Man or given his unconscious body to the police, who we see trying to arrest him just before their second fight. If we ignore all of the tools in his arsenal except for his gas, he is still capable of winning every fight he has, easily. But this is just a comic book movie about web-slinging heroes intended for kids, Shandy. It doesn't have to make sense. Alright, Patrick, that's fine by me. It just means I can now say the same thing for literally every bad MCU movie now, can't I? Captain Marvel, no longer a bad movie. Avengers Endgame, just a space adventure through time. Far From Home? Well, I actually don't want to get into that movie just yet. It will have its turn eventually. But back to the gas. It is incredible how the Green Meanie doesn't use such an advantage more often, especially since he knows how well it works. We see that Spider-Man was knocked out for a good few hours at most. Now try to think of all the shit Goblin could do to him in that time. I'll leave that to your imaginations and move on. I, again, don't have anything to say about the conversation between Goblin and Spider-Man here, other than Goblin's plan is a bit odd, but I don't really mind it. Just some classic Saturday morning cartoon bad guy villainy. No real problems, moving on. Goblin explains to Spider-Man that he could just join Goblin in recreating the city in their image, or potentially cause the deaths of countless people in battle until they are both dead. He also says prior that eventually the city will learn to hate him, and we see Peter reflecting on this when he notices a newspaper about Spider-Man saying the citizens call for his arrest. Now you'd think I'd have nothing to say about this, and you'd be right. However, something was brought to my attention by a good lad named SK Comics. He provided me a picture of the prop used for this newspaper, and it's interesting. Apparently, Peter Parker is credited in the newspaper for taking pictures of Spider-Man. It isn't very clear to see here, but if we use this picture of the prop and zoom in, we can clearly see it says Peter Parker. Now this is an issue, because this messes up one of two characters depending on when Jameson decided to put it in. 1. If Jameson credited Peter in all the newspapers before the attack on the Bugle, then it makes Green Goblin's appearance even more retarded for attacking the Bugle directly instead of finding Peter. This could potentially even allow him to solve the identity of Peter's alter ego much sooner than we see in the film. We already know it doesn't take much for him to correctly assume this, so perhaps he is capable of doing it sooner. All he'd need to do is realize that pictures only started popping up once Peter went looking for a job. Admittedly, this is more of a reach, but it's fun to think about, but who really knows. 2. The second is if Jameson does this after the attack on the Bugle. This is less of an issue than the first, but still a problem. This is because it contradicts the character of Jameson that we have been shown in the film. The guy who won't give up his employee even if it means direct harm to himself and even possible death. It also means that Goblin should now be able to figure out the photographer is Peter, based off of the newspaper, unless we are to assume he didn't read the newspaper the entire night and well into the next morning. Which is being really generous now, isn't it? Considering how he has been shown twice in this movie to read the newspaper when he wakes up. Moving on to the next scene, we see Peter catching up with MJ outside of an audition for a soap opera. He finds out about it thanks to his aunt who was told by MJ's mum, so it makes sense how he knew where to find her. No problems there. All in all, the scene is very sweet and I enjoy the chemistry. That's solid stuff. The follow-up fight with the gang rapist also has some nice choreography and is shot really well. And who doesn't love the upside down kiss in the rain? Now I have already mentioned my problems with MJ in this scene, but now I also have to add that Spidey even uses the same catchphrases as Peter. It's like, how much more of a clue do you need at this point, MJ? She also now has a much clearer view of his webs than she did before, as well as seeing the flip. Why she doesn't at least compare to what she saw before with Peter and Flash is just lovely, isn't it? Can't have that final movie payoff if our main character's love interest figures out who the superhero stalker is, now can we? I feel like I'm beating a dead horse at this point, but I swear I'm not doing it on purpose. This movie just does things to me, man. I can't help it. Moving on to the next scene, we have a burning building, people are being evacuated, and a woman screaming for someone to save her baby. And just like that, someone notices Spider-Man arriving on scene in the nick of time, entering the burning building to rescue whoever's trapped inside. So people in this universe can look up. Then please explain to me why nobody noticed Peter in this scene, you fucking wankers. Things appear dire as the building explodes and lets out a large lick of flame. However, Spider-Man makes it out alive along with this random woman's baby. But, oh no, someone is still trapped inside and is screaming their tits off. Just before the friendly neighborhood menace to society can leap up to save them, he is stopped by a police officer who pretends to do his job for 5 seconds and lets Spider-Man go to save whoever is stuck inside. Spidey arrives and approaches a figure who appears to be too scared to move. Psych! You thought? It's actually Public Menace number 2, the Jolly Green Jackass. He was the one who started the fire in order to draw out Spider-Man. He has returned to hear Spidey's answer for the deal he proposed 2 nights before. Spider-Man says no and says his breath smells like burnt pubic hair, which makes Goblin hella mad. He reacts by throwing Goblin bats to rip him apart as punishment for implying he doesn't brush his teeth, which of course he does. I mean, look at those pearly whites. They have a wee little scuffle and Spidey manages to get attacked by one of those little bastards, which activates his inner red pill and allows him to Neo his way out of another sticky situation. Unfortunately, Goblin is not a fan of Keanu, so he tries to go for a quick attack, leaving Spidey to respond by calling him breathtaking and fleeing the scene. Now Goblin is in a state of mild guilt and hunger, which is why he shows up for a turkey dinner in the next scene. Okay, so with that scene out of the way, let's dig into some of the issues with it. I am very curious how Goblin managed to start this fire without anyone noticing a 5'7" foot green leprechaun walking around an apartment building this early before Christmas, if not outright arriving on his glider. But well, the movie doesn't care to explain it, so why should I? Anyway, cool fight and all, but how many times could you have put an end to it immediately, either with your vaporize everything in the area grenade, or a normal grenade? Or, your so handy sleep gas? Why was your first reaction to use fucking boomerangs? I understand Australians conquered the outback with these things, but unfortunately for you, your spider is much bigger. Or is it? During this scene, he could have been pelting Spider-Man with a number of his grenades. Hell, even if you threw just one vaporizer grenade, I'm sure it would have done some sort of damage, even if his spider senses kicked it. With the fight ended, we see that both characters manage to escape and evade the police. I'm completely fine with Spider-Man being able to evade them, but of course Goblin does too, using his loud as fuck, smoke-trailing grinder to do so. Fine, whatever, not like the police were incompetent in this film to begin with. Moving on. Now the scene starts with Norman getting summoned from the depths of the first floor, along with MJ and Aunt May all in Harry and Peter's apartment, preparing a Thanksgiving dinner. Harry is nervous because this is the first time his father will be meeting MJ, so he wants to make a good impression. Which is odd, because if anyone, it should be MJ who would worry about such a thing. Howbeit, she is completely calm and actually tells Harry to relax. I like this little detail of MJ. She's confident in herself and tells this to Harry during the World Unity Festival when he asks why she doesn't wear the black dress. It's a neat touch. Norman eventually makes it inside after telling Robert Pattinson to scrub the floors again and delivers the gift of fruitcake. He then gets introduced to MJ and everyone gets distracted by Peter's landing. He looks MJ up and down and gives her a dirty grin. They go to inspect the source of the noise, but when they arrive, there's nothing to be seen. Norman comments on the state of Peter's room and almost leaves, but stops when he hears the sound of a single drop of blood landing on the floor. Of course, Peter just can't use his other hand to catch the fallen drop of blood if he's worried about it. It ain't like he isn't capable of doing that in this movie. No, of course not. Also, if Peter was capable of doing this from the start, why didn't he just backflip out of the window? Shandy, you are nitpicking again. I know, I just enjoy poking holes in this movie. Don't mind me. So Peter gets changed into his normal people clothes with his can of cranberries. The meal can now proceed. A few moments ago, the dinner table was at peace, but everything changed when Aunt May noticed Peter's cut. Only the Goblin, master of bombs and knives, understood what this meant, but when May needed him to carve the turkey, he vanished. A few moments passed and Harry threw a tisk fit at his dad for leaving after he organized this whole thing. Although his insanity is great, he's going to need a lot of practice before he can correctly communicate with anyone. But at least he gave his son a lesson on thought patrol before he left. Unfortunately, MJ doesn't appreciate higher education, so she leaves too. So now, it's about that time again, to dig into the problems I have. Here we go! So Storm and Norman is able to figure out who Peter Parker really is based off of a cut on his arm, and a tiny bit of coincidence. Why in the spaghetti bolognese consuming fuck is MJ with a lot more ties to Peter not capable of doing the same thing? Oh, but Shandy, there are 8 million people in New York City. Why would she assume it was Peter, a guy she has known since she was a kid? That kinda makes her look narcissistic, doesn't it? Yes, this is in fact a real thing said by someone I am assuming isn't a sentient toaster. The thing is, there have been multiple instances in this movie where MJ could have asked Peter a couple of questions in regards to this issue. However, she just doesn't do it. Even if it were impossible to ask Peter in these instances for whatever reason, what was to stop her from setting this meeting up with him later on, like for example going out for a coffee and a cheeseburger and then asking him then? Peter can deny it as much as he wants. I don't need him to admit anything. In fact, I would actually appreciate it if the movie showed him being a good liar. It's an essential skill to have for someone who has two identities. What I don't like is how stupid our main love interest is made to look. But enough harping on, let's get on with it. Dinner's getting cold, and I know many of the Raimi fan community are not going to care what arguments I have made. The mere fact I am shitting on their sacred cow is enough to build me a pyre and set me aflame. After Norman leaves the dinner table, he goes to have another Gollum/Smeagol type conversation with himself again, where he convinces himself that he needs to make Peter suffer for his betrayal. He asks himself how he's supposed to do this, to which he responds to him by saying he needs to attack Peter's heart, aka something or someone important to him. So Norman agrees and together they go to attack Aunt May at her home, giving her a good scare, and this manages to put her in the hospital. I have no issues regarding this part of the movie and really have nothing to say until we get to the part where MJ goes to the hospital. So instead of blabbering on, I'll just move on to that part instead. Next we have MJ arriving at the hospital, and she doesn't ask what put Aunt May in the hospital. Okay, so Peter not being told what happened is fine, no real issue there, especially since he figures it out by himself with a little bit of assistance from Aunt May. MJ, however, is a different story. Now, I don't know about those of you who are watching, but whenever I hear about a friend of mine who's been sent to a hospital or someone they are family with, I usually ask them what happened and if they are going to be okay. In fact, I don't know many people who wouldn't ask these questions. Peter does it in this scene, so why doesn't MJ ask here? It is possible that Peter told her beforehand, but I wouldn't know because the scene starts with her asking if she is going to be okay. There's also the possibility her mom told MJ since Aunt May lives right next door, so that could be a reasonable answer to my issue. However, this in of itself is a problem. The fact that Aunt May was attacked should also have made the headlines of the Daily Bugle, which she could read, but with nothing in the movie to go off of, I can't really do that. The reason why I can't is because of how strange it would appear to MJ that Aunt May, of all people, was attacked by the Green Goblin, despite seemingly having nothing to do with him. If she starts questioning why this happened to Aunt May, and brought up her questions to Peter, this scene could have gone very differently. For instance, some light bulb could have clicked in her head if she were to think of ways Aunt May would be connected to this, which would lead to her thinking of Peter. Now this is where alarm bells should be ringing, because if Mary Jane questions these strange occurrences with Peter, then she too could start spotting the coincidences in her life that involved both Spider-Man and Peter. This scene is probably the perfect place to ask Peter any questions she would have, if she was smart enough to do this in the first place. It could also be a good opportunity to see how good Peter is at lying on the spot, a skill he has already displayed before in the movie. After all, a superhero with a secret identity who is bad at lying wouldn't last very long, now would he? But since this never gets brought up, and MJ is too stupid to think about anything other than having a spider in her mouth, there really is no point in discussing it further. So, move on we shall. But one more thing I will add before I do this. If anyone wants to tell me that MJ wouldn't ask these questions because it is an inappropriate time, may I remind you of what they discuss instead.
The fact is, I'm in love with somebody else.
You are?
Rather than asking these more important questions, Mary Jane decides to talk about her newly formed love interest for Spider-Man with Peter while in Aunt May's room. Now I understand that MJ would want to avoid talking about any traumatic experiences that could potentially affect Peter's mental health, preferring to talk about something fairly innocent such as a crush which could provide a harmless distraction from his troubles. But if she is asking this question, then how harmful could something like "how'd you meet" really be, especially if she's just trying to have a conversation with him? Hell, Peter seems interested in talking about Spider-Man to her when she says this isn't the right time to talk about it. Well, MJ, if you felt this way, then why did you bring it up, huh? Peter says he is Spider-Man's unofficial photographer, yet his name is on the newspaper in the scene we discussed earlier. This movie really likes playing with its own consistency, doesn't it? But since this is the first time MJ is apparently talking to Peter about his job, why wouldn't she be asking him more important questions like, well, why does he only want you to take pictures? How did you meet? Why are your shots always so clear? You look like you're standing right next to him a lot of the time. How are you consistently near Spider-Man to take these photos? Is there something you're not telling me, Peter? Are you Spider-Man? You know, maybe she really is just narcissistic. Hopefully that isn't something that continues into the other movies. I know people really wouldn't like it if she were a cunt, would they? MJ doesn't even need to mention Green Goblin or Aunt May, since all of these questions are more to do with herself and Spider-Man, who she feels comfortable discussing about anyways. But whatever. Peter discusses the feelings he has for her that he told Spider-Man. Aunt May smiles and Harry walks in to ruin the mood. Moving on. So after Harry visits Peter in the hospital and walks in on MJ and Peter having forced sex, he goes back home and pouts about it to his dad. This scene is actually pretty touching. Harry is in the most vulnerable state we have seen him, and despite being happy to hear his enemy has another weakness, Norman acts like a completely different person, and embraces his son, telling him he was an ass, but he is going to fix it. Sweet stuff, my dude. To remind you who directed this movie, we get a random goblin jump scare. It's put in an odd place and doesn't do anything to service the story. It's just a jump scare. Alright then. So after that odd little spook, we have Aunt May waking Peter up. This is another little touching scene between the two. In fact, I think every scene with Aunt May in this movie is dynamite. Unless MJ is in the room. She gives us a little history lesson of when Peter first saw MJ, and it's cute. She even tells him to stop being so mysterious all the time, and if it would be such a bad idea if MJ knew how he felt since everyone else knew. Peter panics a little bit and gets up to go use the phone. This movie keeps giving me a reason to think MJ is an idiot. If Aunt May can figure out Peter is withholding information and is acting mysteriously, then why wouldn't she? Whatever, let's just get to the finale and wrap up this mess of a video. So Peter goes to use the phone and tries to contact MJ, asking if she is okay. But, oh no, that dastardly evildoer, Green Bean, has answered her phone and asks if Spider-Man wants to participate in his game. We then cut to MJ on top of a bridge somewhere in New York, who almost falls to her death as she stumbles around trying to figure out where she is. How does Goblin know where MJ lives? If Harry only introduced her to him recently, that would mean he has never seen her before. So how did he locate her? He could have asked Harry where she lives, but why would he? And more importantly, why would Harry bother to tell him? Harry isn't the kind of person in this movie to start drama with his friends, so why would he allow Norman to start any potential problems with them, especially considering how fond Norman is of Peter? So did Goblin, after talking to Harry, go back to his room, bust out the yellow pages, and just start scrolling until he found out where she lived? I mean, cool if he did, but damn if that wouldn't be a funny sight to see. Imagine Norman sitting on his couch with this big-ass goblin grin, just flipping through this fat yellow phone book, looking for an address to the woman he's going to kidnap and hold hostage. But, oh well, moving on. So MJ's fumbling around, looking all confused like, when suddenly, the menacing goblin comes flying out of nowhere, narrowly missing her head and proceeds to blow up some building. I don't actually know what purpose this building serves, and I'm just going to presume it's what's used to control the cable car the children are riding in. But it doesn't really matter. What is important is Goblin is packing the real missiles tonight, and not the firecracker that went off during their last fight. I wonder if he will use another rocket during this fight, or if he's all out of ammo. Maybe the reason Goblin doesn't use all of the gadgets at his disposal is because they work like cooldowns in Overwatch or Apex Legends. Maybe he just needs to wait 8 weeks before he's allowed to get another rocket. Or even better, he needs to deal damage to his enemies to build them up faster. Whatever the reason may be, I'm sure it won't cost him the match or make him use an attack that is just really fucking stupid. So Spider-Man arrives on scene and is appalled at the state of the bridge, so he decides to slingshot himself closer to the fight. Holy fuck, how powerful are these rockets? What did they hit? While this is all going on, Goblin kidnaps the cable car of children and holds them, as well as MJ, hanging over a several meter drop into the sea. So now that the gang's all here, Goblin offers him a choice. Save the little children or the woman he loves. Okay, MJ, are you paying close attention to this, or is the screaming preventing you from listening? During my vain ordeal of trying to understand what Goblin's motivation for doing this was, he manages to release his grip on MJ and the cable car, compelling Spider-Man to act quickly in rescuing them. This leads him to catch both MJ and the car, which forces him to remain suspended in the air while hanging underneath the bridge, awaiting for the assistance of an oncoming barge. As we are left to observe the reaction of Goblin's displeasure at witnessing Spider-Man successfully saving every involved hostage, I find myself questioning his objective in this fight. If his goal was to simply teach Spider-Man a lesson and lost, then the most efficient method of doing so would be to simply lasso him, as we see being done later in the confrontation, instead of aimlessly trying to punch him loose on his grip of the hostages. However, if his goal was to kill Spider-Man, then why toy with him in such a strange fashion? He displays clear annoyance at Spider-Man's successful rescue attempt and is shown multiple times trying to knock him loose of his grip, yet he also develops a desire to murder his target as he activates his glider's death spikes, only to be knocked aside at the last second. So if his goal was to assassinate Spider-Man, then why bother using the least effective method? His glider has access to rockets, machine guns, a lasso, grenade, a trident, and batarangs, as well as his own personal supply of sleep gas. Any of these methods would accomplish his goal in a far more accessible manner and requires much less effort on his part. I also find the argument of sadism to be a weak one, as we see him wishing to terminate his opponent, rather than simply catching him and forcing him to witness his failure at work. As the scene is playing on, Goblin knocks Spidey a few times, even managing to get him to let go of the cable wire, which almost kills MJ. So you absolutely can hit him, and he won't even be able to fight back. Why are you taking so long to finish the job then, you Green Garden gnome? Eventually he decides he's had enough of this nonsense, and pulls out his ultimate move. His diva bomb, I mean his glider spear.
Winky face.
He charges at Spidey and is just about to tag him when out of fucking nowhere he gets headshot by a random object. How did the dude manage to hit Goblin with what looked like a can of oil? How does one even manage to aim so well that they can hit a moving target under a bridge and hit him on the first try while also making it a headshot? People want to give Indiana Jones shit for surviving a nuke and Ray for phasing a knife out of reality, but what about the Goblin who got hit by the world's luckiest and most unrealistic oil can? If that dude didn't hit him when he did, then Spider-Man would be skewered. Movie over. People had better not fight this. It would be a very clear double standard. Like, the scenes move fast enough that they don't really have time to think about what happened, but Jesus Christ, this is a really messy scene. This is the equivalent of sniping a fly in your room with your nut. It just ain't happening. So Goblin is now distracted by items that really wouldn't harm him, and instead of blowing up a portion of the bridge with his missiles, or aiming his onboard machine guns at either Spidey or the people throwing shit at him, he just tanks all of the shit being thrown at him and allows Spidey to lower the kids onto the bridge. But before any celebrations can be had, Goblin rodeos Spidey and drags him to an abandoned building for the final fight of the movie. I mentioned the lasso before, but now that I'm on it again, it makes me wonder, where the hell was he hiding that thing? He doesn't have a utility belt like Batman, and I don't see how he can saw that anywhere on the glider. The same goes for the big-ass spear trident thing he gets from the ether during the final fight. Did Spider-Ham give him a one-size-fits-all pockets trident just to kill Peter for the scene? Or did he summon the wrath of Poseidon to help him smite down his foe?
Danny! Let Neptune strike ye dead! Parker. Hark! Hark!
We see Spidey being tossed around through a wall initially, then smashing through a glass panel before taking a grenade to the face and flying through another wall. Okay, so my head hurts again. Possibly the alcohol making its way into my brain. What exactly is Peter's durability in this movie? I have already mentioned it beforehand with Bonesaw and the chair, but like, come on. Are you really going to suffer the same sort of exhaustion from a steel chair as a grenade? And not just a grenade, but a grenade and two walls. Now, before anyone gets pissy at me for this, I am fine with him being physically exhausted from the grenade and two walls. I am not fine with the fucking chair. Those two things are not equal. I mean, Green Goblin hits a lot harder in this movie than some dude with a chair, and he shrugs it off, no worries. Just another sign of this movie's amazing consistency with power scaling. Now, for those of you who remember all the way back in the beginning of this video, the fact that one of the spiders which was mixed into the DNA of super spiders was capable of spinning webs whose strands have a tensile strength proportionately equal to the type of high-tension wire used in bridge building, and that they most assuredly
English, motherfucker, do you speak it?
would be stronger for Peter since they are thicker. I told you to keep this in mind, and for good reason. Goblin just ripped through that shit with zero difficulty, like an actual fucking Chad. But now that makes me think about something that happens later in this fight. Why is he afraid of a small wall falling on him? He has just displayed several feats of strength, including ripping the webs, holding the barge, in one hand mind you, and carrying Spider-Man like a handbag. Why is he scared of a wall? This wall leads to his demise at the end of the movie. If he simply pushes it off of him like you would expect someone with this level of strength to do, then he doesn't become dazed and Spider-Man doesn't lay the smackdown like he does later on. At least he would have to change his angle of approach. But speaking of Peter, why doesn't he shoot Goblin in the face with his webs? He knows that it works really well, so why not try and do it again to gain an advantage? He is kicking your arse, and you are failing to use the one advantage you have in favor of looking like a cunt waffle. Holy fuck, how are you this incompetent at fighting? Why must everyone in this movie just suck all the time? The webs to the face would be twice as effective here because his eyeglasses are no longer protecting him. If he gets that in his eye, there is no way it's coming out. If Peter is worried that it will blind Norman, then I am shocked. He is more worried about his enemy potentially being blinded than he is in the scene where he gets kicked in the glider and just allows him to fall. This type of thing would injure most people, but Peter just doesn't give a shit. Why would he care here? So Norman is finished beating Peter into a spider stew and decides to taunt him before finishing him off with the trident. This activates Peter's Devil Trigger ability, and he then returns the ass-kicking he received in full. What a useful time to use that sleep gas of yours, hey Gobby? Now would be a really good opportunity to use the one weapon you have that Spider-Man's spider senses can't detect. You're going to let the glider do the work. Really? But why? You are right there, just spray the gas in his face, you uncooked breakfast burrito. Oh my god, during this fight, did you both get all 2 of the brain cells you shared beaten out of you? And why does Norman use the glider spear? Why doesn't he remote control it to shoot his machine guns? Bullets travel faster than your glider. Even if you managed to skewer Peter, the glider would still be flying towards you and would have done some serious damage to you. I thought you were supposed to be intelligent, Norman. The wall falling on Goblin just made me aware of something. Goblin is wearing armor and is an enhanced human, a super soldier if you will, so his durability would be pretty stellar. A wall falling on him hurt him, or at the very least dazed him. This same wall level villain then gets the snot beaten out of him by Spider-Man and seems hurt by his punches. So much so that he asks him to stop. Peter could have been punching at full force, or he could be holding back. But I am inclined to believe full force was used, since Goblin can take it, and he threatened the woman he loved. Goblin is catching this fade.
I feel like I live in a world made of cardboard, always taking constant care not to break something, to break someone. Never allowing myself to lose control, even for a moment, or someone could die.
See ya.
It's Spider-Man!
You serious?
But you can take it, can't you, big man? What we have here is a rare opportunity for me to cut loose and show you just how powerful I really am.
But now remember Flash and Bonesaw from the beginning? A high schooler who took the full brunt of one of these punches and walked away with no injury, and a man who took several kicks to the face without massive repercussions? Please think about that. How someone who is considered to be a normal human being walked away from a punch that hurts Green Goblin. So Goblin dies how he lived. A failure. But at least he goes out strong and tries to make up for his failure by preventing Harry from knowing he was the Goblin. It's a shame his ghost and mirror don't share the same sentiment. So after the battle and after hearing Norman's last request, Peter delivers his body, naked and wrapped up in a blanket, whoa, where did you get the blanket, back to his home. Upon arriving, Harry's Iron Boy Jr. senses start tingling, so he goes to the room at the same time, witnessing the scene transpire. He is as confused as I am, but he pulls out a gun where I simply just make a video. Okay, so Harry has a gun. I can't wait to see how he uses that again in the future. After this, we get the funeral scene for Norman, and it's here where Harry promises he will make Spider-Man pay for his father's death. Is no one going to question when Norman died and the Green Goblin disappeared around the same time? The same night, even? Was Norman's body never inspected for cause of death? Did Harry not question why his father had 2 piercings in his abdomen and was completely naked? Did he just assume this was all Spider-Man's fault because, like, holy hell, that is one fucking leap? Spider-Man doesn't use bullets, so what makes you think he uses spears? Also, was a police investigation not started? Did Harry just not call the cops after the dead body of his father was hand-delivered back to his house? Was the death of the owner of Oscorp Industries not made known to, oh, I don't know, the Daily Bugle? Jameson would be having a field day if the son of Norman Osborn accused Spider-Man of killing his father. This would be all over the place. What about MJ? Was she not at least interviewed by police? Or why she was kidnapped by Green Goblin? What he said to her and Spider-Man before disappearing? If she has any reasons for being kidnapped? No? Nothing? Wow. So after Harry leaves, Peter has some time to ponder about his life and comes to the conclusion that it would be the people he cares about most who will be harmed if he continues to be Spider-Man. It is because of this reason that he decides to tell MJ that he can't be with her after she expresses her feelings to him. But hang on before we continue. MJ, while you were up there or even after, did you maybe stop to think, why does Green Goblin know that Spider-Man loves me? Because if you didn't, then I'm really concerned with what your priorities are. You would rather confirm your feelings for someone and tell them to their face, than to make sure that you haven't been sold out by someone you know. Like, maybe the person you are confessing these feelings to, the only person on the planet who knows Spider-Man and knows he has feelings for you. Did you maybe not think that Aunt May was attacked as a warning to Peter if he didn't tell Goblin about you? MJ, this is a really naive and dangerous thing to be doing. Like, seriously, bro. Maybe that narcissistic claim could actually be true. So, before Peter tells MJ he can't be with her, MJ expresses her feelings to him and kisses him, while standing on the grave of his dead uncle. I mean, there are probably worse places to do this, although there are definitely also better places. But whatever, she says how she feels and Peter rejects her for the reasons mentioned. While walking away, it is implied that MJ realizes who Peter actually is with the kiss, but doesn't pursue for some reason. I guess it would go against the message of the movie or something. Gotta have my themes, man. Gotta have my themes. I love them too much. As Peter walks off, he narrates yet again and says that,
"Whatever life holds in store for me, I will never forget these words. With great power comes great responsibility. This is my gift, my curse."
Gee, Peter, I wonder how long that will last you. 'Cause to me, it looks like this promise has the same sort of shelf lifespan as peanut butter, and possibly the same stability too. Once all is said and done, we end the movie off with one final triumphant swinging scene through the city, Danny Elfman's score blaring in the background, and with that, the movie ends. Now for some final thoughts. I still really enjoy watching this movie, despite what some of you might think. However, it is more of a guilty pleasure now than anything else. This movie still has tons of charm to it, such as the solid performances from the whole cast, with memorable characters like Goblin and Jameson stealing the scenes every time they are on screen. The music in this movie is glorious and helps deliver all the right emotional beats for the scenes they are in. The movie is also shot very well. I love the direction for most of it and think Raimi is a very talented man with the camera. But the story is not very good. There are just so many problems with it that bog it down from being a good movie to a pain in the ass. If I had to give it a rating out of 10, I'd probably go with a 4 if not lower. However, the movie isn't insulting to watch like a few others can be, and have been. It's just bad. It is just a light-hearted campy mess the whole family can enjoy as long as you are not thinking while watching. Which I assume most people were doing, considering this movie's high praise over the years. Deadass, there are people who think this is the best Spider-Man movie we have ever received, and I don't understand it at all. Not when we have the likes of Homecoming and Into the Spider-Verse. One thing I also want to do is put each movie into a tier rating after reviewing and critiquing them. So starting with this one, I'm going to be putting it in the D category. I sincerely hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was a pain in the ass and took a long time to make. Next video will be on Spider-Man 2 and will be followed soon after by Spider-Man 3. In fact, I will be doing a video similar to this one for every Spider-Man movie, including the Amazing films, the MCU, and even Into the Spider-Verse. All of them will be reviewed, all of them will be ranked. Before closing off, I would like to give a special thanks to those who have helped me. Firstly to the Serpent for his constant aid in helping me with the script, as well as being my comrade in this entire Spider-Man debacle. Next is possibly the biggest thanks for Uvafor, for not only sitting down and listening to my points for God knows how long, but also for supplying me with a new PC so I could make this review, and helping me with the editing. Love you, Muffin. Next up is Marcus Fixeru, sorry if I mispronounced that, and SK Comics for supplying me with the relevant screenshots and helping me find the props I used for this video. Last but definitely not least is Southpaw for basically getting me started down this long road of depression and infinite joyless suffering. Thanks, Home Slice, I appreciate it. But in all honesty, he has been a great help. thank you very much, and thank you to any others I have not named for being grade 8 as well. And with that said, I bid you adieu.
Is it over? Not to the fist jumps.